All right, as we've mentioned in previous videos, there are different t distributions depending upon the degrees of freedom that you have. Depending on how many degrees of freedom, you get slightly different t distributions. They're all nice and symmetric. They have a nice bell shape to them, but they're not the normal distribution in there. They vary a little bit, and so you get slightly different distributions with different degrees of freedom. And the way that we do this, at least in our textbook here, is what we look at is you look at the assorted t-scores that kind of go off to one side or to the other side. You got the negative ones, and a lot of times what we're interested in is maybe what's the area, or what's the proportion of the population is from some point out into one of the tails. So based on your degrees of freedom, like if you've got something with 7 degrees of freedom, what we do is, what the textbook typically does is, instead of having the actual t-score, it goes the other way. It kind of gives you the p-values, the proportions out here. So it says, okay, so well, you have to go to this point, and at this point the area is 5%. And if you go to this t value, that the area that's left out here is 3% or whatever the percentage is. So it gives you the sort of the markings up there. So if you want to have, like, if you've got a t-score of 2.65. So if your t statistic is 2.65, what we want to do is we want to find out where that is. And the normal way that we do it is we go to the table here. Here's the table. And we're going to say we have degrees of freedom, or 7 degrees of freedom. And so I'm looking at 2.65, and I get 2.65 is here in the middle. It's not letting me. Well, maybe you can see where that is. It's here between. I've got a 2.517 and a 2.988. It's somewhere in that range, and so what we get is, if we go all the way down to the bottom of the table, if we're looking at a one-sided thing, that our p-value is somewhere between 0.02 and 0.01 and 0.02. So we've got that if we look at that t distribution, if I know that my p-value is trapped in between those two values. One was 2.99. What was the other one here? I'm gonna scroll back up to where they were. 2.9988 and 2.517. 2.998 and 2.517. And so I know that from 2.517 on, it was 2%, and this area out here is from 2.98 on is 1%. And so the question was, well, we came up with a t-score of 7 point something, and what happens with that? Well, 7 point something, if we look at the table with 7 degrees of freedom, well, it's off the end of the chart over here with 7 degrees of freedom. So what I know is that my p-value, that as our t-score gets bigger, if you look down here at the bottom, the p-values keep getting smaller as you go across here. As you move across, the p-values are getting smaller. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Boy, I got it all over the place now. Ebook, that's where I wanted to be. And the tables. But as the p-value goes, the so link there to table C. Yeah, that as the p-value increases, close that navigation thing. That as the t-value increases, the p-value gets smaller and smaller. You're farther away from that center line, you're going to get a smaller and smaller area there. And so if we're outside, we've gone beyond if a t-value is 7 point something, I know that my p-value is smaller than that farthest value that we have on the chart here. It looks like it's 0.0005%. 0.05%. 0.0005. So it's a pretty small p-value in there as well. But if I want to find it a little bit more exact, we can do the calculator has a built-in function as well. So you're far enough out there that the p-values get smaller and smaller the bigger the t-value is, because the area in this tail, as you move farther out on this distribution, the area gets smaller and smaller out here, and we're looking from like 7 on, it's going to be a real small amount in there. If we can get that off of our calculator as well, under the distributions, if you've got a TI-84, under the distributions, there's the TCDF function in there. And if you're looking at something in a tail, so I want to go from maybe I want to go from 7, it was like 7.1 or something like that, to infinity, and you want to just use a really big number in there, something even bigger than you had before, and then degrees of freedom we're working with was 7, and so let's paste that in there. So some of you might have to type in the numbers kind of in this order, where you put your lower bound, your upper bound, and then your degrees of freedom at the end. The degrees of freedom at the end tends to trip people up. They keep getting an error message because you're forgetting the degrees of freedom at the end. It'll tell you what your p-value actually is. With 7.1, it was 9.68 times 10 to the minus 5. The calculator shifted into scientific notation with the e -5 on the right-hand side. So if you can get actual values from the calculator, actual p-values from the calculator, or if you're using that table, the best we can do is we can get an approximation. We can bracket that t-value. We bracket our t-score between the two values in the table, and then that brackets the p-value between the corresponding parts down there. All right, I hope that kind of makes a little, I hope that straightens things out for you. All right, makes some sense to you.